Hi, I'm Kat, and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome. This is a channel where I like to talk about books and ideas, and today I have some standalone fantasy book recommendations for you. So I think it's definitely a feature of the fantasy genre that it's not unusual for books to come in series of either 2 or 3 or maybe 7 or 10 or even more books of a story that just builds and builds and builds on itself. And that can be really fun and rewarding when there are characters or worlds or just stories that you really love and you want more and more and more of. But it can also be really daunting as a person who is just getting into a new world or story to think, oh my god, this is going to go on for a dozen books, and is that something that I really want to commit to, especially if I'm interested in seeing how it ends. There are also people who maybe just don't want to wait years in between releases, and also sometimes it's nice to just read something new without having to worry about being sucked into this multi-year commitment of a series, even if it's something that you love. It's nice to have a kind of one and done, I've finished the story, I'm happy, I'm satisfied sort of experience with reading. And as someone who is currently in the middle of, I think, 32 fantasy series at last count, that's a lot that I feel like I still have to read, and I'm caught up on some of them, but not all of them. It's about half and half. So while I definitely have a love of fantasy series, I thought it'd be fun today to recommend some standalones or books that could be read as standalones so that you can maybe have a break from all of these series if you're like me and you read a lot of fantasy series. These are just some nice one and done books, and I really enjoyed all of them, and so I'm excited to tell you about them. All of these books can be read as standalones. Some of them do have follow-up books that were written, but all of these do resolve the plot and don't really leave a ton of open questions, and you will feel satisfied at the end. And if you really like the story and you want to pick up any following books, you can, but you can feel satisfied that you have read and hopefully enjoyed the story and not feel a further commitment on your TBR unless you want it. So that's what we're doing today, and I've got 6 books to tell you about, so let's get into them now. So the first book we have here is The Teller of Small Fortunes. This book follows Tao. Tao is a traveling fortune teller who was brought to the kingdom in which she lives when she was very young, and she's always felt kind of out of place because the culture of the country from her birth is very different than the country in which she lives now. And at the beginning of this book, she is eyed with perhaps more suspicion than usual because the country of her birth is threatening war with the country in which she now lives. But Tao travels around in her wagon telling small fortunes, things like, is it going to rain next week, rather than, are we about to be invaded by our enemies? And during her travels, she comes across some other travelers, and they form a sort of caravan. The first companions who she runs into are a former mercenary who is looking for his lost daughter and a former thief who is helping him. They later pick up a baker and a stray cat. This was a sort of cozy adventure / mystery. It's about friendship and being an immigrant and learning what you want out of life. Even though there are parts of this that are a bit meandering, it's in a really good way, and I had a really good time reading this and getting to know the characters and taking this journey with Tao. If you like cozy fantasy and you want to read a story about friendship, I would highly recommend this book. The next book we have here is The Familiar. In this book, we're following Lucia, a young, secretly Jewish woman living in Inquisition-era Spain, where obviously being anything other than a good Catholic is liable to get you killed. Lucia works as a servant, and her mistress catches her performing these little miracles. Things like if the bread is burnt, she can make it unburnt, or she can mend a dress without needle and thread. Her mistress ends up coercing her into performing these miracles for dinner guests as a form of entertainment, and this ends up catching the attention of some very powerful people, and Lucia is thrust into a competition with the hopes of impressing the King of Spain. As a housemaid, this is pretty much her only chance in life to ever be anything more than a housemaid, and so Lucia throws herself into this competition with the help of an immortal familiar. This was amazing. It was in my top 10 fiction books of 2024, and I really enjoyed it. There were parts of this that really just pulled at my heart, and what I really enjoyed about this was the representation of women. Not only do we get this perspective from Lucia, this young housemaid, but we also get perspectives from her mistress and her aunt, who are both these different representations of women who would have lived at this time. And it was interesting to see how, even though their lives and their social standing was very different from one another, they were all at the mercy of the men in their lives. I really enjoyed this book. The characters were wonderful, and the setting and the plot were great, and so if you enjoy historical fantasy, I would highly recommend this one. The next book we have here is Bride by Hazelwood. This book follows a vampire misery who has grown up among humans. So in this version of our world, the humans and the vampires and the werewolves all know about each other, but there is an historical animosity between the werewolves and the vampires, and they both have tense relationships with the humans. So as part of keeping the peace between the humans and the vampires, they have for years maintained the system of collateral, whereby a child from a powerful family from the humans and from the vampires are exchanged, and the idea is that if anything goes wrong and they hurt each other, then the child is in danger. So this keeps them generally from antagonizing each other, and when she was a child, Misery was this collateral, and now as an adult she lives among the humans of her own free will. Until one day her father calls her back to the vampire community and tells her that they're going to do a similar exchange, this time with the werewolves, and instead of just being collateral and going to live with the werewolves, she is going to marry one of them instead. So this leads her to marrying the alpha of the werewolf pack. One of the reasons that she goes along with the scheme is that she wants to find her friend who is missing, and she suspects that the werewolves are involved. So we get a little bit of a mystery as she goes searching for her friend, but also tries to deal with the feelings that she is having for her new husband, who she's really not supposed to like. This was a really fun book. I am generally a fan of Leigh Hazelwood, if you can't tell, and if you enjoy her contemporary romance and you also like paranormal, I would definitely recommend this one. It is a bit different than what she usually writes, but it was a really fun read. The next book we have is The House on the Cerulean Sea. This book follows Linus. Linus is a caseworker for the department in charge of magical youth, and his job is to make sure that magical children who are cared for in government orphanages are well looked after. At the beginning of our story, extremely upper management summon Linus and give him a new assignment where he is to be posted to a remote island where a very specialist orphanage needs to be investigated. When Linus arrives at the island, he finds an eclectic array of children under the care of the charming and charismatic Arthur Parnassus. Linus is initially very wary of the children, who the government terms dangerous, but he soon learns that not everything is what it seems, and he needs to make some choices about whom to believe and what to stand for. This was a lovely story about found family and standing up to discrimination, and I really loved the author's writing style. The tone he took during this book really reminded me of a Disney movie, one of those ones that's for both adults and children, and although this is very much an adult book, it has that kind of whimsical character that was really enjoyable. I know that Klune has just written a sequel to this book, but it can, in my opinion, be read as a standalone because it wraps up very nicely in this book. So if you're interested, you can read it as a standalone, and if you really like it, then you have the option of reading the next one. The next book we have here is Sorcery of Thorns. This book follows Elizabeth, who has grown up in a magical library full of grimoires that, if not handled correctly, can turn into terrifying monsters and attack people. When someone sabotages the library in which she lives and one of the most dangerous grimoires gets loose, Elizabeth intervenes and ends up being implicated in its release. She's taken to the capital city to face punishment and has no choice but to turn to Nathaniel. Nathaniel is a sorcerer, and in this world, sorcerers use the grimoires to perform their magic, and Elizabeth has always had a deep suspicion of sorcerers. She thinks that they're evil. However, Elizabeth's situation forces them to work together to figure out who sabotaged the library, clear Elizabeth's name, and save the kingdom. This is a book full of magical libraries and demons and adventures, and I really enjoyed it. I love the relationship between Elizabeth and Nathaniel, as well as their relationship with Nathaniel's demon servant Silas. This was a really good reading experience, and I would highly recommend this book. This is another one where there is a kind of follow-up novella. If you really love the characters and you want to spend some more time with them, you have that option, but it's not necessary because the plot does wrap up in this one. And then last, but certainly not least, we have Guns of the Dawn. This is another one that was in my top 10 fiction books of 2024, and I would definitely recommend it. In this book, we're following Emily. Emily is a gentle woman living in the kingdom of Lascaux, and at the beginning of the book, in the neighbor kingdom of Deadland, the king is killed and a parliament is set up, and the Deadlanders wage war on Lascaux because having a kingdom next door is apparently repugnant to their republican values. So this is a fantasy world, but it is very historical, our world coded, and there are parts of this that remind me of Pride and Prejudice and Little Women, and I understand that those are different times, different places, but that's kind of the vibes I get in here, especially in the beginning with Emily and her sisters. So Lascaux is embroiled in this war, and of course the first thing they do is they put out a call for soldiers, and then they institute a draft, and eventually all of the able-bodied men are swept off to war. Some time goes by and Lascaux is still not doing very well, and so they institute a women's draft. So every household must give a woman for the war effort, and so Emily decides to go for her household, and she is sent off to basic training to join this war. I think the strength of of this book is definitely in the character work, as Emily finds herself first trying to hold together her family after all the men are taken away, and dealing with the impacts of war on the civilian population, things like shortages and just the fact that half the population is pretty much gone. There are also some very clear political themes about the impact of war, not only what it's like to fight in it, but the causes and how different actors contribute to it and the impact on civilians and non-combatants, as well as what happens after. When one side surrenders, how do you move on with life? This is something that the author explores in here with Emily's character, both in the macro and the micro, and really getting into how individual actions can have much wider implications. This was a really interesting thing to think about and explore, and I really like how the author did this, as well as just the story that he told in here. This was amazing, and if any of it sounds interesting to you, I would highly recommend this book. So that's it for the video. If you have any fantasy standalone recommendations or books that can be read as standalones, let me know what they are down in the comments. I'd love to get some more recommendations. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please like, and if you'd like to see more from me in the future, please subscribe. I hope you're having a great day wherever you are, and I hope to see you in my next video. Thanks very much. Bye.